These are the most disturbing things that happen inside the Warhammer 40k community, and will go from weird to straight up illegal. Hangar 18 Hobbies was a store in Cary, North Carolina, owned by Brian Powers. The store would sell games, toys, and trading cards from lots of franchises. However, increased tariffs or taxes from the US government on all internationally sourced products meant store prices were going up soon. And at the time, political news stations wanted to know how this was affecting business owners, and Brian even gave them an interview talking about how he was planning to help his customers through the store.
We're trying to mitigate that with discounts to offset it so the consumer doesn't have to worry about it so much.
And still, ever so often, Brian would host a game night for his customers at the store. And one of the games was Warhammer, a tabletop fantasy game where players used miniature army sets to simulate battles in various universes. So to play the game, members collected army factions made of characters and weapons that cost points in the game. They'd set up each game with an army budget, the standard being 2,000 points, so the players could arrange their armies the way they wanted while keeping the games fair. But if they wanted to buy the smallest playable army, the Combat Patrol, which was worth 400 to 600 points, it would cost them $170 as of making this video, and they'd have to paint the miniatures too before playing them. That meant that they had to buy multiple sets, paints, and supplies to play one standard game, which would cost the average player between $500 and $1,000 each year. On top of that, it cost thousands of dollars per year for competitive players, so newcomers often just got told to buy second-hand or find discounted ones online. And one day in early 2025, an unassuming man walked into the store, someone who would actually visit really often. We'll call him Mike. Every time he came back, he would look at the high-value items, the Warhammer 40,000 game set and Warhammer Age of Sigmar collection sets, both of which are spin-offs of the Warhammer series, as well as the trading cards. Mike lived in Southern Pines, North Carolina, which was over an hour away, and was making the long drive again and again over the course of months to the store. Now fast forward through multiple visits, it's April 24th, 2025, and Mike walked into the store, but this time he came along with two identified kids. Now while the younger people got the attention of the store employees, Mike went and looked around at the game sets, as usual. However, that day, while they were helping the kids, one of the employees saw Mike stealing things from the store's shelf, and upon seeing this, the employees called the police. However, by the time they arrived, he was already gone. But it didn't matter, because the police had access to the surveillance footage, and the man was taped removing a Warhammer 40k set from a display case and dropping it in a tackle box, a portable container people use for holding tools or fishing gear that he'd brought with him. Now at the time, no one had any idea who he actually was, but they immediately started an investigation, and within days, the Cary Police Department identified the man as 34-year-old Matthew Ray White. Brian, the store owner, while struggling financially already, found out that Matthew had been stealing from him multiple times over the last few months that he'd been visiting the store. And with this newfound information, the police got a warrant to search Matthew's house in Southern Pines. And so after 3 weeks of trying to track him down, police were inside Matthew's house, and they found $10,946.47 worth of stolen merchandise, including two Warhammer Age of Sigmar Empire collection sets, each costing at least $2,000. The rest of the loot included multiple 40k sets, stolen toys, game pieces, and trading cards. And as a result, on May 18, 2025, police arrested Matthew and booked him into Moore County Jail near his home in Southern Pines. He was held in a holding cell to wait for further proceedings, and during questioning, Matthew ended up admitting to all of his crimes. In the end, he was charged with 12 counts of theft and was placed under a $3,000 bond. And in the aftermath of the case, Warhammer gamers asked themselves online why these types of thefts were so common. One post on Spiky Bits, which is a popular Warhammer and gaming site, tried to explain this and said, "Warhammer kits, especially limited editions or large sets, hold serious value, sometimes even more than high-end electronics. A few boxes can be worth thousands, and they're pretty easy to flip online." Now regardless of what motivated him, in the end, Matthew still awaits trial for his crimes. And while Matthew had a pile of Warhammer merchandise in his house, the guys from the next story do too, something they'd call their pile of shame.
Within the confines of the hobby, we call it our grey pile of shame.
You grey pile of shame?
Yeah, because they start off grey, and I have a very large grey pile of shame.
The story starts with two friends, both young men in their early 20s, both living in Carlisle, UK, and both of whom loved Warhammer 40k. And while they bonded over their gaming hobby, their relationship would lead to a downward spiral for both of them that they couldn't escape. Now one of the guys was Jamie, and for him, things hadn't always been easy. By the time he was 10 years old, he'd been bullied so badly at school that he was formally diagnosed with depression. The harassment was so bad that at the age of 15, he was even diagnosed with PTSD. But despite all of that, Jamie still finished high school and went on to study biomedical political science at the University of Carlisle. But not long after he started university, Jamie had to put his education on hold after having a fallout with his parents. They cut him off, and without them, he couldn't get a student loan to continue. Now, he didn't know that in the UK, students with this home situation could apply for a separate loan without their parents. So instead of simply doing that, he quietly dropped out, and without a job or having a place to live, he ended up living with his partner, relying on them for money and having far too much time on his hands. And so instead, he started filling his days the only way he knew how, at the Warhammer store. Now, the exact place was an official Warhammer store on Earl's Lane in Carlisle city center, where he would spend hours obsessing over the miniatures, knowing that the little money he did have saved up had to go towards food. And around this time, what started as a hobby began to grow into an obsession. And he wasn't alone in this, because Warhammer addiction is more widespread than people realize. For players with this issue, as soon as new models are released, they'd compulsively hoard the figures, making it less about playing the game and more about owning every new release. It gets so out of hand that collectors coined a term for it, the pile of shame, which are boxes of unpainted and unused figures that cost a fortune and never get touched. And while he was going through this exact same thing, Jamie met someone who would help him scratch his Warhammer itch. One day, while Jamie was browsing in the store, he met Joshua, a 22-year-old student in the area. As it turned out, Joshua was dealing with his own struggles, and like Jamie, he had a history of mental health problems. The pair bonded, and soon they became friends. Now, as the friendship grew, they would visit each other's houses and play Warhammer. Eventually, Jamie had an idea for how they could keep feeding their habit without actually spending any money that they didn't have. And so he privately clued in Joshua to his plan. One day in July of 2022, the two of them walked into a Warhammer store together like the average customers. Then for the first time, they picked up multiple paints for their Warhammer miniatures, slid them into their backpacks, and casually walked out without paying. Now, nobody had seen what they did as they left, and no alarm bells went off by the doors. And they could have stopped here, but with addiction at play, one theft wasn't going to be enough. So the two of them went back to the store soon after that and did the same thing again. Except this time, the haul wasn't just paint, but escalated to larger items like actual miniatures. This approach seemed effective, so for the following year, they kept coming back and would pick up hundreds of pounds worth of merchandise each time. In 1 year between July 2022 and July 2023, they hit the store a total of 4 times. But by late August 2023, they become so confident that they struck the store 4 times in 1 week alone. And soon afterwards, on September 4th, they took their biggest haul yet and walked away with over $1,270 worth of Warhammer merchandise in a single day, which is more than what competitive players spend in a full year. Now, in the end, after a 14-month spree, the two boys made off with $8,300 worth of figures, paints, and other game accessories. What they didn't know though was that all 9 of their trips to the store were caught on CCTV, and it didn't take long before one of the employees noticed how items would mysteriously go missing whenever these two boys showed up at the store. And after checking the CCTV footage captured on each of the days the two had shown up, the employee immediately called the police, who arrested Jamie and Joshua not long after. Now, in the interviews that followed the arrests, both of them admitted to their thefts. Joshua, however, told the police that he had only taken items worth of 500 pounds, about $670, rather than almost 10,000 pounds. Now, this led to Jamie's house being searched, and the prosecutor on the case said, "Following Mr. Lane's arrest during a search of his premises, Warhammer items worth 3,368 pounds were recovered. That therefore leaves an outstanding loss of 3,154 pounds. The two boys' cases were tried separately, but both of them pleaded guilty to the thefts. Jamie appeared at the Carlisle Magistrates Court in northwest England, and in his defense, his lawyers brought up his familial difficulties, financial struggles, childhood bullying, and mental health issues. Now, Jamie was visibly emotional throughout the trial, and in court, standing before the magistrates, he simply said, "I never wanted any of this. I was going through a really bad patch." Now, in the end, the jury handed Jamie 16 weeks in prison, suspended for a year, which means that he wouldn't actually be going to prison as long as he stayed out of any more trouble and followed through on the obligations imposed on him. Now, as a requirement, he had to complete 10 days of addiction counseling or rehab, and on top of that, he had to pay £1,286 back to the store at a rate of £5 per week. That's $1,717 and around $7 a week. Facing a free world rather than immediate jail, Jamie, who was accompanied by a friend in court that day, told the jury, "Thank you, I really appreciate it." Now, meanwhile, in Joshua's case, his defense rested on the argument that Jamie had led him into it. His lawyer said, "He was very much led on in becoming involved in this offending. That is not to say that excuses it in any way. It is an explanation. He's not prone to conduct himself in this way nor this fashion at all." Now, Joshua was sentenced to 8 weeks, suspended for 1 year. And for him, he was also ordered to complete 15 days of rehab, more than double Jamie's 10 days. And just like Jamie, he was ordered to repay £1,286 to the store at £5 a week. Now, at least these guys had the decency to feel bad about what they did. The next person in this video disgusted everyone by taking pride in his hateful actions.
When the curtain falls, risk it all, hold nothing back, seize the day, we must attack.
Set in Talavera de la Reina, Spain, 800 plus players are battling it out for hundreds of dollars worth of sponsored prizes against some of Warhammer's most prestigious competitors. The November 2021 edition of the GT Talavera tournament series was titled El Regreso, or The Return, to celebrate its first time back after the COVID-19 pandemic. Players joined in groups of 10 and would compete one-on-one against members from other teams, playing for the majority out of 20 points. Then, the individually earned scores were added to the group's total for the final rankings. Now, 2 local groups had put the event together. It was a collaboration between a local hobby shop called Invasion Talavera and a Warhammer gaming club called El Corpador del Va, or for my sake, CW from now on. But the independent tournament wasn't officially associated with the Games Workshop, the company behind Warhammer. Now, with such a big event, people started calling it the largest Warhammer 40k team tournament in the world. But instead of being famous for just that, it would become famous for much more. But before I get to what went down that fateful day, you need to know about some Warhammer lore. The Imperium of Man was a galaxy-spanning human empire in Warhammer 40k that was satirically inspired by authoritarian regimes, religious extremism, and survival at any cost. As you can tell by the uniforms, the regime was fantasy first, but also inspired by real-world totalitarian regimes like the Nazis or Stalinist Russia. So it would naturally attract a brand of far-right players that identified with the Imperium's obsession with purity, identity, and order, one of which happened to be at the GT Talavera. Sometime before the event, this player registered for the tournament under the alias Pintor Austriaco on the public tournament system, which translates to Austrian painter, a direct reference to Adolf Hitler, who, in case you didn't know, was an Austrian painter before he went all dictator. And registered alongside Pintor Austriaco, he had his team of 9 players called the Princesos, a slang term for the princess. And on Saturday, October 30th, 2021, when time for the event finally came, Pintor Austriaco arrived with his team in an all-black uniform. However, his shirt had emblems of some very specific political parties. His chest area on the left had a bundle of arrows that referenced the Spanish Falange, a fascist political party from the 1930s Spain, with a sun cross, a Nazi symbol, superimposed over it. His jacket also had a symbol that was meant to look similar to a swastika, which together were all neo-Nazi symbols. As if nothing was wrong, Pintor Austriaco went through the day without causing any trouble. Well, that doesn't mean that no one was bothered by them. There was a team present that Saturday called BCN Wargames, another Warhammer club from Barcelona. Both teams were from the same area and had met before, and they knew that Pintor Austriaco and at least one other player on the Princess were openly Nazis. And when BCN Wargames reviewed their tournament matchings, of all the people at the event, Pintor Austriaco was selected to be one of their competitors. Now, before the match could even happen though, the team made a decision that if he showed up in the uniform the next day, there was no way that they were going to play against him, and they would rather forfeit the match and take a 20-0 loss. So keeping this in mind, they came back for day 2 of the event, but they saw Pintor Austriaco wearing the same neo-Nazi symbols. So when it was time for their match together, the team took the Prince's captain aside and told him that they refused to play against Pintor with those symbols involved. And later on, they brought their complaints to the event organizers. So after the confrontation between the teams, 2 CW members met privately with Pintor Austriaco. Instead of complying with the simple request though, Pintor Austriaco refused. And more than that, he threatened that if they tried to expel him, he would involve the police. His argument was that the symbols he wore reflected his personal beliefs, and that actions against him was political discrimination. Now, Spain did, in fact, have laws against discrimination due to ideology. And on top of that, Pintor Austriaco was so well behaved to the organizers that they didn't really have a legal reason to remove him. So they had to let him continue. However, with Pintor Austriaco still in his uniform, BCN Wargames handed the Princess a default 20-0 victory. Now in the end, on Sunday, October 31st, 2021, the tournament came to a close. And with his 3 points, Pintor Austriaco and the Princess achieved 8th place overall. But when the news got out, it was like a fuse that had been lit. Because a week later, on November 8th, Luis Zed, a writer from El Descanso del Escriba, a popular Spanish Warhammer blog, posted a detailed first-hand account of the incident. His message to the organizers just said it all, writing, "Now there are fans, even from here, who know where Talavera de la Reina is on a map, thanks to you, because you let freaking Nazi scum participate in Warhammer tournaments. And they participate because you let them, and you don't say a word, you don't do anything, or you cover it up. Bravo, bravo, bravo. What pride, right? I'm being sarcastic. Shame, shame, anger and disgust are all I feel about this. And pity. I hope someone has the decency to unfollow me and have no further contact with me or my blog before I have to unleash the banhammer and put it to work." Now, the organizers didn't let that article have the final word though, and the next day on November 9th, CW addressed the controversy in a since-deleted livestream on Twitch. Now, Luis will explain how that worked out soon, because he came back to write a first-hand account of the livestream where he wrote, "What happened? Well, any negative mention of the event, or more specifically, the incident, was censored. And that leads to the thing I want to mention. This morning I received an email from the team of the player who complained about about is flaunting neo-Nazi iconography. They weren't able to give their side of the story. For example, during the War Collector broadcast, because they were censored in the channel chat, as they explained, and since they were clearly harmed by the situation, the least they could do is give their version of events. And only a week later, on the 17th of November, CW released an official English language statement, which defended their decision to keep the player on in writing, saying, "These types of people are professional provocateurs who know perfectly how far they can tighten the rope without having legal consequences for them. In this case, the person behaved correctly at all times, leaving us without weapons to expel him by not having a criminal behavior." Now in the same statement, they apologized for not having a legal framework to avoid the situation, writing, "We've taken note, and in future editions we will write legal tools in the tournament basis that allow us to expel people like this with the law on our part. In the 10 years that we've been playing tournaments, we've never faced such an unpleasant situation, and did not realize that it would be necessary until now, which we deeply regret." And right now is a good time to note that one of the organizers that met with Pintor Austriaco was in fact a lawyer. But anyway, the club signed off the letter, wondering if holding the tournament was even worth the burden after the controversy they'd just been through. "We are a group of friends who only get together to carry out a tournament for others to enjoy, without any profit in it. These situations make us wonder if it is really worth spending so much effort and time that we stop being with our families on something so easily discredited and dirty." Now the situation had blown up so much that by November 19th, 2021, the official Games Workshop published a statement called "The Imperium is driven by hate, Warhammer is not." And in it, they bluntly announced that anyone that wore real-world hate symbols at an event in the future would be asked to leave, writing, "We believe in and support a community united by shared values of mutual kindness and respect. If you come to a Games Workshop event or store and behave to the contrary, including wearing the symbols of real-world hate groups, you will be asked to leave. We won't let you participate. We don't want your money. We don't want you in the Warhammer community. For those heroes out there running their own Warhammer events, we'd love for you to join us in this stance." This post by Games Workshop marked the first time they made any sweeping public statements about rules at third-party conventions. Now after the mess he'd caused, Pintor Austriaco was formally removed from the international Warhammer 40k competitive rankings, and many similar tournaments announced that they will remove anyone wearing hateful symbols from any real-world movement, including GT Talavera themselves. Ultimately, GT Talavera survived the reputational damage, and they continue operating under CW with the 2025 edition of the tournament even having Games Workshop staff presence for the first time. Now while Pintor Austriaco had a standoff against one team of 9 members, this next guy would battle hundreds of thousands of wargamers at the same time.
Arch Warhammer is dead.
At this point, 40k is already on the trajectory of being over.
In March 2014, a man in Norway started a YouTube channel under the name Arch Warhammer. At the time, very people were making Warhammer content on YouTube, so he quickly became any lorehead's go-to YouTuber by creating long-form and often hour-long breakdowns of the game's lore. And by 2016, he had 35,000 subscribers, which back then was a strong following.
Warhammer 40k is arguably the most in-depth, lore-rich fictional setting there is. There are hundreds of full-length novels featuring thousands of characters from dozens of factions, split into hundreds of sub-factions, all trying to share the setting.
Now the Warhammer universe has plenty of content, spanning 50 years worth of lore and based on over 300 books. So Arch's deep dives were really deep, breaking down entire factions, wars, and key characters. For example, in this video about Astra Militarum, an Imperial faction, he went into everything about their history and identity.
The Imperial Guard, or Astra Militarum, whichever you prefer, is the largest organized fighting force in the galaxy, consisting of uncounted billions of men and armored vehicles.
And went on for over 46 minutes straight. Now lore wasn't totally necessary to enjoy the game, but people tended to like it. There's even a notable part of the Warhammer community that prefers the stories and doesn't play the game at all, and these people made up a large part of Arch's audience. And while his channel grew, there were signs that politics was a hot topic in the community. For example, in 2015, someone made a God Emperor Trump meme that showed Trump's head superimposed on an image of the Imperium of man's God Emperor, and that was all over Reddit, with people trying to decide if the meme was idolizing Trump or was ironic. But Arch had no idea he'd get pulled into these conversations one day very soon. It started around April 2018, when Arch hosted this 34-year-old Swedish guy named Marcus Fallen on his platform. Marcus is an online fitness guru who's better known by his YouTube channel name, The Golden One. The video was basically an interview, and they talked about Warhammer. They also talked about transhumanism, the idea of using technology to improve human abilities, and robotization, which explores the idea of using robots to do tasks that were previously done by humans. Arch's audience were caught completely off guard by the collaboration, because Marcus was widely known as a far-right white nationalist, which basically means that he's someone who believes that white people are superior to other races, and that society should be organized to benefit white people exclusively, and supports extreme political policies based on that belief. He was even known by the Anti-Defamation League, an organization that focused on fighting extremism, as someone who had ties to the Nordic Resistance Movement, which is a neo-Nazi organization which has goals to replace Nordic democracies with one Nazi-style state. So the two men working together became a piece of evidence that Arch was ideologically aligned with the far right, and other evidence started piling up too. People noticed that Arch said divisive things online, like in one video when Arch referred to the nobler race from Warhammer Fantasy as House Endorse, and to the people of the fictional Arabi region who were, as the name suggests, based on Arab people, as Sand N-words. And all this evidence was getting harder and harder to ignore. But Arch carried on, and since he covered all sorts of lore other than just Warhammer, he branched out into other games too, like the Total War series, a PC strategy game by the company Creative Assembly that we're going to call CA, where players try to build and conquer ancient civilizations. In 2018, the developers of the game introduced female generals to Rome 2, one of Total War's spin-offs, in a free patch update. How it worked was, depending on the faction, the patch would spawn female generals into the game at varying rates, between 10 to 15%. And for the most part, the changes went unnoticed. But in August 2018, a user on Steam, a platform for buying and discussing games and software, posted this comment on the community forum complaining about the number of female generals.
I'm not buying Rise of Republic. I've bought nearly every game and DLC that Creative Assembly has produced for Total War. But there are way too many women in the game now. It looks plain silly. Yes, I know ambitious women made their mark throughout history, but they weren't as prevalent as the game suggests. Empire Divided spams women, as if all ancient nations were ruled via matriarchy. Call me what you will, I could care less. I'm gonna keep my dollars this time.
Now in response, a community manager for CA named Ella McConnell pretty much shut the criticism down, replying to the comment that the game was, quote,
historically authentic, not historically accurate,
suggesting that players didn't like it because they were sexist, saying,
if having female units upsets you that much, you can either mod them out or just not play. People saying they won't buy the game because there are too many women in it is fine with us. If that's their reason, we'd rather they didn't anyway.
Now she did know her comment would trigger Arch enough to join the conversation, and 1 month later he released a video titled Creative Assembly Don't Want You to Play Their Games, and went on about Ella's accusation and her saying that loyal players that don't like it just shouldn't play the game. In his own video he said,
the vast majority of your player base doesn't give an F about this. It's only when you try and shit on us that we start getting angry without you.
And the story might not have spread as widely as it did if it wasn't for a neo-Nazi site called the Daily Stormer that blew its visibility up in a since deleted blog post. And after that, a search of over 300 negative reviews piled onto Total War Rome 2's Steam page from the Daily Stormer's audience in less than 24 hours.
Not recommended. It's an authentic review, not an accurate one. My daughter asked me, Daddy, why are there no giraffes in the game? And what am I supposed to answer her, CA? That during that period there were small to nothing battle giraffes? Are you nuts? I demand battle giraffes for my woke kid. Can't believe that CA only has women/male generals. What about those few generals that haven't decided their gender? Not inclusive at all. CA told me not to play their games, so I will never buy another CA game in the future. Rome wasn't patched in a day.
Now despite the uproar, CA issued a statement defending the female generals feature, and they made sure to let players know that the feature would not be removed. And Arch, who'd put himself in the middle of the conversation in the first place, got pulled further in during a farewell stream for a CA developer, who signed off the video in a very weird way.
And Arch Warhammer is goodbye.
Arch acknowledged the developer in a dedicated video of his own.
I don't even mind that he's calling me, like I could give a
And since the developer has said this on the company's platform, CA had to formally apologize to Arch themselves, saying,
earlier this week, a statement was made by a member of our team on a live stream that was not up to our personal or professional standards. It did not reflect the views of the studio. We apologize for any hurt or harm caused.
Now by October 2019, any conversation mentioning ARC was so politically charged that moderating them to keep Islamophobic, racist, or misogynistic comments off of the platform basically became a moderation nightmare, specifically for r/40k lore, a subreddit that was a primary discussion page for, Warhammer 40k lore. Now desperate to relieve the workload, the subreddit's moderators posted an announcement to explain why people would see less of Arch in the subreddit that wrote,
as you probably know, there are several topics that, whenever show up, there is huge discussion around them. One of them is related to a certain self-proclaimed master of lore, Arch Warhammer. For the longest time there has been an unwritten law that Arch is persona non grata of the sub, and mentioning him in any way way, especially positive, was frowned upon, but in recent times we have found it necessary to impose new restrictions. As of today, Arch Warhammer makes a list of banned topics on r/40k lore.
The phrasing, specifically disliking especially positive mentions, signaled a disapproval of Arch from the mods that went beyond just keeping content on topic, and it was rumored that the ban was pushed by a mod who also moderated r/SigMarxism, a subreddit for leftist wargamers. Now regardless, the ban sparked lots of conversations and attention in the comments. The critics, they said,
"When you tear out a man's tongue, you're not proving him a liar. You're only telling the world that you fear what he might say."
But others said things like,
"He got what he deserved."
in the comments below the post. The overall effect was, the ban gave Arch more publicity, and his channel amassed well over 200,000 subscribers by this time, and what no one expected was what would happen with Arch's image over the next year. On June 4th, 2020, 10 days after George Floyd was murdered at the hands of police officer Derek Chauvin, widespread Black Lives Matter protests about systematic racism blew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, before spreading to the entire United States.
Protesters in LA blocked the downtown 101 freeway. 40 people were arrested during a protest in New York City. In Minneapolis, the National Guard moved in as the local police station burned.
And in the heat of the discussion, GW issued a statement on Twitter titled "Warhammer is for everyone" that wrote,
"We will continue to diversify the cast of characters we portray through miniature, art and storytelling so everyone can find representation and heroes they can relate to. And if you feel the same way, wherever and whoever you are, we're glad that you are part of the Warhammer community. If not, you will not be missed."
And as usual, Arch posted a 10-minute dedicated video parodying the name to "Warhammer is for everyone," but he wondered how the same company that wanted inclusion could say anyone that disagreed with them will not be missed, and called it conditional inclusivity. Then he told his audience to overwhelm GW's inbox with an email template he wrote that said,
"For the first time ever, Warhammer chose to say, if you feel the same way, we're glad to have you, and if you don't, you will not be missed. For the first time ever, fans of Warhammer were attacked for their opinions. It is time for Games Workshop to step up and say, Warhammer is for everyone. No, if you agree, no, you will not be missed. No ifs, no buts. Warhammer is for everyone, including people like me."
And according to him, the campaign was a success, because in one of his later videos, he just plain out said,
"Yes, indeed, we crashed that little bastard. We made it go the way of the dodo. That is impressive."
But he was about to get exposed. On June 5th, 2020, screenshots from Arch's private Discord server got leaked to r/SigMarxism, and Arch was caught chatting to multiple users in a way that was impossible to defend, writing messages like,
No, the N-word is not a smart creature, prone to violent outbursts. The black man is just fine. In the immortal worlds of Chris Rock, there are black people and there are N-words, and N-words have to go.
Now Arch himself refers to the Sami people, an indigenous group of northern Scandinavia, saying,
"Sami equals Romani people, but worse. At least Romani people only steal things. It used to be legal to shoot them."
In the same chat, another member replied,
"Time for field exercises with live ammo."
The term field exercises refers to the activities of the Nazi Einsatzgruppen task forces who actively moved through small towns and countryside, kidnapped large groups of civilians, and killed them in mass graves during the invasion of the Soviet Union during World War II. So what they were literally suggesting was a way to deal with the Sami people. And as you could guess, the leaked screenshots triggered a wave of outrage across all major wargamer community platforms. And while quick to respond to the other things, this time Arch was silent. And 1 month after the screenshots were released, on July 3rd, 2020, Wargaming.net, the developers of World of Warships, an online multiplayer wargame that had been collaborating with Arch for promotions, distanced itself from Arch with this post on Twitter, writing,
"Due to human error on our side, a rather controversial figure in the Warhammer community, Arch Warhammer, was involved in our marketing activities for World of Warships and War of Warships Legends. While working on our Warhammer collaboration, we were specifically warned by Games Workshop not to work with this influencer, and we agreed to do it. Thus, we ended up sponsoring the person we don't want to be affiliated with and failed to fulfill an important and rightful request of our partner. Once the issue became evident, we've terminated the partnership with Arch Warhammer and ceased the sponsorship. We've also sent a request to take down the promotional video."
Now later that July, Arch retaliated with another email campaign and protest, which he spoke about in a now privated video on his channel. But the video was not aimed at Wargaming.net, but actually at GW, urging his 200,000 plus subscribers to tell the company to keep politics out of Warhammer. He's quoted in articles saying,
"We all knew this day was coming. It's sadly somewhat inevitable these days, is it not? Unfortunately, the infiltration, the subversion, and the politicization of hobbies has been a pretty damn common occurrence over the last few years. I've predicted it. Many of you have as well. And again, it was hardly a difficult prediction. We've seen it happen in video games. We've seen it happen in movies. We've seen it happen to Marvel. We've seen it happen to Star Wars. And now it is happening to Warhammer. I think we have one last chance to send a bit of a warning shot across across Games Workshop's bow to simply say, stay out of it, don't get involved, stay neutral, simply keep producing the universe and the miniatures that we all love, and we will all be happier for it.
Now Arch made sure to also mention that he was not alt-right and didn't know about any alt-right corner of the Warhammer community before asking his audience to join his campaign. Now that same July, Black Library, the publishing arm of GW, ended its contract with one of its freelance authors, Thomas Parrott, claiming that he was a poor representative of their brand. His posts are now deleted, but basically Thomas defended a YouTuber for their right to make the joke,
"Don't send death threats to bisexual people for calling Space Marines gay and fascist. In the community are bad and need to be dealt with."
Despite apparently ending things with him, GW kept using Thomas's content, so Arch's supporters saw that as evidence that the company's Warhammer is for everyone statement was hypocritical. Now as a final KO, GW sent a copyright strike to Arch's YouTube channel that required him to remove Warhammer from his YouTube channel name. And unlike before, rather than fight the strike, Arch renamed his channel to simply Arch. But he made sure to release a video claiming GW had no legal basis to force the change, and that he actually just didn't want the conflict.
This is going to cause a lot of troubles for everyone, so okay. I'm not too attached to the one part of the name. Everyone knows me as Arch anyway, so fine, I'll change it. No skin off my back.
Now a month later, in August 2020, Arch got interviewed by Vice in an article called "The Culture Wars Have Reached Warhammer 40k. Now you can tell from the title what it was about, and Arch was asked about his past use of racist language and about the comments on his leaked Discord server, but instead of addressing them, he plainly said that
He doesn't really concern himself with how extremists interpret his speech,
and that he will
continue to allow jokes.
Now when they asked him about politics in Warhammer, he said,
"If you are the most extreme tanky or even the most extreme fascist, if you simply want to play a game of 40k, not talk about your politics, simply collect the miniatures, I do not view that as Games Workshop's duty to stop it."
and left it at that. But despite claiming not to care, he still released another now privated video responding to the Vice article, breaking it down point by point. Now Arch's career was attacked from all sides, because by August of that year, the adult content production company Studio FOV released a promotional first look video of Subverse, their new adult game featuring Arch, and when this video was shared on r/gaming, the backlash was pretty immediate. Comments flooded in like,
"Oh god, it's this guy. Is there a video from a different source? I'd rather not support this particular YouTuber."
and
Giving your exclusive first reveal to a guy so racist he can't cover Warhammer is certainly a decision.
underneath it. And a Studio FOV community manager responded to the feedback quickly in their community Discord, saying,
"We were not aware at the time that he had made racist and other controversial statements in the past. We did not look into his background as much as we could have, and we know now this was a mistake."
but he actually deleted his account just as quickly and replaced it with another one that had the opposite message.
We would like to make it absolutely clear. We have no problem with Arch personally. We simply wanted him to showcase some of our gameplay together, which Arch did professionally, and he was very gracious with his time. We appreciate his time and want to say we are sorry for jumping into a politically charged situation so quickly. Subverse has no political affiliation. It's a game to be enjoyed by everyone.
And with a quick apology and backtrack, a company developer then posted directly to their Kickstarter page calling the entire situation a mistake, writing,
"I'm not a PR expert. I'm just a regular old software guy who sailed into some very uncharted waters. As a result, I made multiple mistakes with communication and take full responsibility for the incompetency."
Now by December 1st, 2020, Arch responded to the situation in a statement on PCGamer.com, a gaming and news website, because he felt like he was getting blacklisted, saying,
"Racism is absurd and therefore makes for a good joke because it is universally recognized as absurd. If you don't view racism as absurd and don't see obvious jokes for what they are, then that's your problem, not mine."
Now whether it's his problem or not, he privated a lot of videos, all the videos related to the controversy in fact, but Arch's accounts are still up and running on YouTube and Patreon. He still makes content actually, and to this day Arch denies being a member of the far right or a neo-Nazi, and his supporters are still strongly arguing against Arch being called an extremist. And while Arch wanted to use Warhammer in peace, the next man wasn't even a fan, but uses Warhammer to get what he wants.
Experts have warned the government about the dangers of addiction for some users.
Fuck me, I can't even it's because I'm so confused now, mate. I'm so involved in it.
Luke Edgington lived in Newport, Isle of Wight, in the southeast of England. Even though little is known about his prior life, what we do know is that in 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, he began to use drugs.
The coronavirus pandemic has led to more drug use around the world. Lockdowns and travel restrictions have forced dealers to find new ways to sell and deliver their drugs.
Specifically, he got addicted to a particular Class A drug. Now in the UK, Class A is the most serious drug classification that covers substances like heroin, cocaine and meth. And over the following 5 years, Luke's addiction escalated. But then in late 2025, he did something which showed his addiction had taken full control. On Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025, Luke walked into TM Taylor & Sons Jewelers on St. James Street in Newport and asked the shop workers if he could try on one of their rings. Now he slipped on a ring worth 385 pounds, approximately $522, and then casually walked out of the store without paying. Now seemingly no one noticed, so he wasn't immediately arrested for this. So 2 days later, on September 5th, he walked into another jewelry store called H. Samuel on Newport High Street. Now jewelry in the UK is usually locked behind glass cases as security, so using his approach to get them unlocked, he wore the jewelry and calmly walked out of the store wearing a gold ring worth 479 pounds this time, or about $626. But Luke didn't stop there. 6 days later, on September 11th, he was in TM Barber Jewelers, just down the street from his last heist, trying on more gold jewelry. Now the staff handed him a silver necklace to look at instead, and Luke again was out of the store before buying anything. Now the silver necklace he was wearing was worth 95 pounds, or $128, but he sold it for the equivalent of $20 for quick cash, and had been doing the same to all the jewelry he stole as a way to support his drug habit. And with all that he'd already done, the jewelers weren't enough. Luke decided to take a simple theft method to a different type of store. 3 days after his last hit, he walked into a retailer called Curry's, which is a UK electronics chain, and there he shoplifted a gaming mouse and headphones worth 134 pounds, or $177. 11 days had passed since his first theft, and he'd already hit 4 stores. Now Luke would take another 9 days before hitting the next store, and on September 23rd, Luke's crimes would meet the world of Warhammer 40k. As we've already seen before, Warhammer doesn't come cheap. And he knew this when he walked into the Games Workshop Warhammer store on Upper St. James Street, where he would grab a Warhammer modeling kit worth the equivalent of $132. And he did the exact same thing again. But that day, things wouldn't turn out so well for him. It just so happened that the same day, after successfully stealing from Games Workshop, Luke was arrested as a suspect in theft cases from the stores he'd robbed. And in the resulting police interviews, he confessed, not only to his crimes, but that he did it to buy drugs. And by the next day, on September 24th, the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary confirmed that he had 4 counts of theft charged to his name. But interestingly, at that time, it looked like he'd gotten away scot-free with his Warhammer store crime. So a month later, on October 21st, 2025, Luke was at the Isle of Wight Magistrates Court, pleading guilty to the 4 counts of theft related to the jewelry stores and Curry's. Now Luke's attorney told the court that before the pandemic, his client had never been in trouble with the law a day in his life. So the addiction was what changed everything. And without COVID, he argued, none of this would have happened. Now the magistrate, a judicial officer that handles minor criminal cases, granted him bail on the condition he didn't enter stores he robbed, and returned to court on January 6, 2026 for a pre-sentence report. But before that court date arrived, something else surfaced, because the Warhammer theft didn't stay buried for long, and so on November 4th, 2 months before his pre-sentencing report, Luke appeared in the same court again, but this time about the Warhammer shoplifting, and he pleaded guilty to this one too. Due to similarity in the incidents, Luke's lawyer and the prosecutor agreed that the court be adjourned and combined with Luke's upcoming case, meaning that this theft would be sentenced along with the others. And so Luke's final day of reckoning came on January 9th, 2026, when he appeared again in the court to face up to his 5 theft charges. Now in the end, he was sentenced to a 2-year community order and to pay back the equivalent of $675 in compensation for the stores. Now the community order basically meant that he could avoid jail time, but would have to follow strict conditions set by the court. Now the specifics weren't disclosed, but community orders usually include things like curfews, rehab requirements, and as I mentioned earlier, being banned from the stores he robbed. And just when it looked like the saga was over, more thefts actually popped up under Luke. His name appeared in the Isle of Wight Magistrates Court's February 2026 case list.
Luke Edgington, 37, of Newport Court, Newport, stole Blu-rays from Asda on 2 occasions in late 2025 and ordered to pay a total of £457 in compensation.
He was back in court less than 2 months after sentencing. Same story, different store. Now Luke was a nobody in the Warhammer world. The storm that happens in the next case though features one of Warhammer's most powerful insiders. Warhammer Weekenders are events designed to bring the Warhammer community together in one place. They usually run from Friday to Sunday at Warhammer World Games Workshop's global headquarters in Nottingham, England, as part exhibition, part gaming hall. So large statues and display pieces fill the room along with cabinets of one of the most best painted miniatures, while seminars, product showcases, and informal meet and greets run throughout. Now designers, writers, and staff move through the same space as normal attendees, trying to make it feel less formal. Now once a year, Warhammer Fest takes place and goes up as the largest Warhammer celebration of the year, and Tony Cottrell has been a central figure in the Warhammer community since the mid-1980s. At first, he made a name for himself as a photographer with some of his work in Warhammer 40k, Rogue Trader, and early editions of White Dwarf magazine, and over time he became well known for being a talented modeler and painter as well. Now his biggest role though came in 1998, when Games Workshop created Forge World as a specialist division in their company, focused on high-end resin models, large builds, and terrain, and Tony immediately became the manager of the studio and one of his lead designers.
Hello everybody. My name's Tony Cottrell, and I'm here today to talk to you about Land Raiders and Rhinos, those infamous vehicles from the Space Marines in Warhammer 40,000.
Then in 2017, Tony became creative head of Forge World. Now on the 3rd and 4th of February 2018, Warhammer World hosted the Horus Heresy and Necromunda Weekender 2018. Tony hosted one of the seminars at the event and was presenting information on the Escher gang, an all-female gang found on the planet Necromunda.
The punk rock roller derby riot girls of House Escher. House Escher, also known as the House of Blades, is perhaps the most instantly recognizable, and at least in my opinion, iconic of all of the gangs found on Necromunda.
During the seminar, while describing the gang, Tony said,
Escher are toxic and vindictive because they're women.
Now this comment spread fast, and within hours, community members were posting about it online. On Reddit, a user who claimed to have a friend in the room posted,
So a friend of mine was at the Forge World Weekender today, and in the Forge World seminar, the above was said, verbatim, by Tony Cottrell when describing the different gangs. Apparently the room got very awkward immediately after this, and people were going up to the event staff for the rest of the day complaining about it.
Now they also flagged something more unsettling.
What's even more worrying is that this was being talked about online for a couple of hours, then all mysteriously disappeared. If you Google exotic and vindicative, there are links to web pages and forum pages that have since been deleted. It's like GW reached out to those bloggers and forum members or whatever and silenced them.
On Tumblr, blogger Council of 13 was equally direct.
I have to say I'm really disappointed reading the quotes from Tony Cottrell at the FW Open Day. To insinuate that Clan Escher are exotic and vindicative because they're women is just outright sexist and inane. I've been reading a lot of responses to the situation on social media, and it's just infuriating that people can't see this from the minority viewpoint.
Now these were just two voices among many. The backlash was widespread enough that just one day later, Forge World felt like they had to respond. And on February 5th, Forge World issued an apology on their Facebook page that said,
We want to apologize for the comments made about Escher and women at the Horus Heresy and Necromunda Weekender. We don't believe in any such sentiment and certainly don't condone it. Games Workshop is founded on principles of fairness and respect, and we're committed to encouraging equality. Bias in any shape or form, deliberate or accidental, is not consistent with our company's value or culture.
Now the general response to the apology was positive, but for Tony, things were soon about to go from bad to worse, after a guy named Josh Mallet came forward with his own experience with Tony. Now Josh was a British hobbyist, miniature painter, and prominent member of the UK Warhammer community. He built his brand under the handle Omegonetch by sharing his work on mostly YouTube and Instagram, where he posted painting tutorials and hobby content. He was most known for his work on Horus Heresy era Alpha Legion models, which earned him the nickname the Alpha Legion Guy across the community, and that was exactly what brought him to the Games Workshop Warhammer Fest in May of 2018. Now according to Josh, during the event, he walked into the room where Tony was presenting about the Alpha Legion and showcasing new models, including Mark 6 Praetor, then the Terminator, Legion Kata Fricti Praetor. And for Josh, who had built his entire brand around Alpha Legion, seeing new models for his faction excited him.
But I remember going into the room and they showed off the Praetor, both Praetors. So they had the guy with the Mark 6 Praetor, I think he was, Mark 6 Praetor with the sword, and the Terminator, Fracti Terminator Praetor. I remember just screaming like, oh my gosh!
So following Josh's burst of excitement, Tony acknowledged him in the room, referred to him as the Alpha Legion Guy, which Josh took as recognition of his presence in the community.
I was like, cool, this is really fun. Alpha Legion are, you know, coming up and stuff.
Now by the end of the seminar, Josh had the final question. As he stood up to speak, before he could say a word though, Tony spoke first, and he said,
Oh, you've got the last question. You're like the black guy at the end of Avengers.
Referencing the ending scene of Avengers Infinity War, where a black character, Nick Fury, gets a big final reveal. Now the whole room broke out laughing, and Josh later said it was packed full of hundreds of guests, but he believed that he was one of the few black people there, so the comment made him feel singled out and humiliated. And what made it worse was that it came from a Games Workshop employee, in public, in front of everyone.
Now Josh tried to contact Games Workshop by email about it, and got essentially ignored, and the incident was buried.
But 2 years later, in the midst of the protests surrounding George Floyd, Josh finally decided to speak out about his experience at Warhammer Fest. On July 2nd, Josh posted a video to Instagram with a caption that said,
With the recent killings in America, I wanted to openly talk about racism, and in the hashtag Warhammer community. So if you actually care about me and my community and the people who live around you, please listen.
And in the video, he spoke about how the event made him feel unwelcome in the community.
That is racist. That's what we call covert racism. And the most painful thing is that people just laugh.
Now people chimed in under his post with comments like,
Please leave your politics out of Warhammer. Man, I've just seen your video explaining what happened to you. It is really it is. You have all my sympathy and support. It sounds like you're looking for offense in anything people say. You will live a miserable life if you're looking for racism in every word and action people do. Covert racism, more like misinterpreting a statement.
Then 2 days later, on June 4th, Workshop posted their Warhammers for Everyone statement, but it said nothing about him, nothing about the incident, and nothing about Tony. Then on the same day as the Warhammers for Everyone statement, Warhammer community site Goonhammer published their own response. In their article, echoing calls for justice in our community, they said,
recently Josh posted on Instagram recounting his own experiences with racism as a Warhammer player. In particular, he recalls an incident at the Warhammer Weekender where Tony Cottrell, Forge World lead at the time and current Old World project lead, publicly made a blatantly racist remark about Josh and made him feel alienated in a hobby he has devoted so much time and energy to. Watching this video made me physically ill as I thought about the pain inflicted on Josh by an uncaring act of racism by an erstwhile leader in our hobby and representative of Games Workshop. What Tony Cottrell did to Josh is abhorrent.
Then in June 2020, Josh went on the Brush Wielders Union private Patreon, a members-only podcast, and spoke in depth about the incident. He talked about the many moments that he experienced racism in the community, and then told the host that he thought the Games Workshop statement was great.
I was really happy. I remember screaming like, yes! Yes!
But he wasn't satisfied with having just a statement from them, hoping that GW would continue to speak out. But he gave Tony some slack during the interview too.
I think what he said was wrong and comes from a place of ignorance. I don't want to highlight him as an actual racist.
And larger organizations chimed in on the situation. No More Damsels is a London-based organization focused on ensuring that gender is not a barrier to tabletop gaming. And in July 2020, the co-founder Sarah Pipkin, along with representatives of over a dozen wargaming groups, sent an open letter to Games Workshop that said,
we have yet to have any public response to Josh's account of his experience of racist comments from a Warhammer staff member, which he later expanded on in the Brush Wielders Union podcast. Josh himself has been very open about his attempts to reach out to you. The lack of communication and the fact that he doesn't want staff to be punished, but rather to be educated so this doesn't happen in the future. Josh has not heard back from Games Workshop.
Now this letter was signed by 12 other wargaming groups and got a bunch of publicity in the community. And then in August 2020, Vice published the Culture Wars Have Reached Warhammer 40k, where they also referenced the open letter saying,
the group also urged Games Workshop to offer an apology to Josh, a black wargamer who's spoken publicly about racist comments. He says were made by Games Workshop staff at a Warhammer Weekender event.
But despite that, Games Workshop gave no response. Now the story spread so far that even this pretty big Warhammer platform, the Precinct Omega gaming podcast, picked it up in an August 2020 episode.
Second, Josh Mallet, aka Omegon Edge, whom I referenced back in episode 6, basically had the issues he raised about being mistreated by GW staff on account of his race entirely ignored.
Where they also referenced the No More Damsels open letter.
No More Damsels wanted to press this matter and find out what exactly GW thought it was going to do about what they saw as an institutional problem. To my knowledge, No More Damsels has had no response to their demand.
Now Josh has continued to create content within the Warhammer community, maintaining his presence as a painter and hobbyist. He kept posting and today has over 20,000 followers on Instagram, and 2,500 subscribers on YouTube, and 402 members on Patreon. In Josh's story, Games Workshop was the one causing harm. In the next one though, they're the ones under attack, but this time they fought back.
¡Feliz cumpleaños! Mira que tenemos tu regalo, ¿eh? ¡Feliz cumpleaños!
Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader came out in 1987 as the first edition of the game. At the time, the Adeptus Custodes were introduced as the Emperor's, yes, that Emperor's personal guard, a group of golden armored genetically engineered super soldiers. And in 2017 and 2018, GW released the 7th and 8th editions of the Adeptus Custodes codexes, which were basically an army-specific rulebook that also included faction lore. For example, a line from the book once said,
Custodes begin their lives as the infant sons of the noble houses of Terra. It is a mark of incredible prestige to surrender one's child to this most glorious of callings, and many notable clans amongst the Terran aristocracy having willingly given up almost entire generations of newborn sons to earn it.
Which made it clear that they were an all-male order, otherwise known as the Brotherhood of Demigods, which becomes very important later. And while GW was creating lore for a fantasy universe, in the real world, the God Emperor Trump meme was trending so much that community members famously made a giant float of it at an Italian street parade in 2019. 2017. Another incident that was evidence that 40k imagery was being used by the political right. Now jump forward to April 2024, and a shocking piece of Warhammer creative assets was circulating online. Basically, GW had announced pre-orders for the 10th edition of their army update, which included a new Adeptus Custodes codex. But before the official release, a passage was leaked that featured a custode named Calades Torovalia Kesh. Now the whole time Calades was being referred to using she/her pronouns, with examples in the leaks that said
Custodian Calades Torovalia Kesh stood upon the bridge of a Cobra-class destroyer.
So the leak left no ambiguity. Calades was in fact both a woman and a member of the Custodes. However, on Sunday, April 14, 2024, when GW announced pre-orders, Calades didn't have a dedicated miniature among the new releases. The only Custodes miniature was a shield captain that could be built with either a masculine head or a non-gendered helmet. Now that same day, people online were asking about Calades, and people didn't expect the way the official Warhammer X account replied to one question on the topic when they said,
in regards to female custodians, there have always been female custodians, since the first of the 10,000 were created.
And then they simply sat back and watched as the post received over 3.2 million views. Now later that day, a Warhammer YouTuber, Auspex Tactics, uploaded a YouTube video about the female custodians that received over 82,000 views in one day.
For now, I don't think there's ever been any clear canon female custodian. Just in the same way that female Space Marines have just never been a thing in the lore.
Similarly, Bell of Lost Souls, which was a leading tabletop news website, published an article on the story called Warhammer 40k, Female Adeptus Custodes Confirmed, writing,
so that's it, straight from the horse's mouth. Female Adeptus Custodes are now firmly 40k canon.
But Mark Kern, who was a popular 54-year-old American video game developer, had the opposite reaction. Up to this point, after leaving his own successful game development company, he tried other projects in the gaming industry, and then ultimately retired, and was better known for being an anti-woke activist on X under the handle @Grumps. So he jumped into the conversation on X to accuse GW of retroactively changing the lore, saying,
Games Workshop lies about Custodes and retcons lore, gender flipping them and the new 10th edition codex for woke points. By now we all know the reason for this. They are rewriting the core lore of Warhammer 40k in order to pander to ESG and DEI masters, who collectively own nearly a quarter of their stock, 22.6%. Instead of introducing new lore, they seek to destroy and retcon the old lore, even lying to your face, to pretend it was always that way, when it never was. It's time to say no in loud voices, and push back on the erasing of male spaces in games. Fight back, don't buy the 10th edition, and spread the word.
Now with Mark's call to action, X users started posting screenshots of their fresh Warhammer cancellation confirmations in droves. And one of those posts said,
kiss my ass GW, not another penny.
Along with a screenshot of their cancelled Warhammer subscription. Now only 2 days after the GW announcement, a former staffer called Nick Davis posted his thoughts about the situation to X. By the way, Nick worked in communications and for the GW magazines, but was never a developer or writer. But he felt he should chime in with,
we were never supposed to build silos of lore, because the very idea of the Warhammer and Warhammer 40k universe was the history was so convoluted and fragmented, there was no such thing as fact. Everything was supposed to contradict, that was the purpose. That being said, I'm overjoyed seeing the hobby that once gave me a means to live being so inclusive, seeing female LGBTQ+ gamers and seeing them represented at the highest level of GW toy soldiers is pure joy.
Now at this point, GW was feeling the effect of the campaign online, but they didn't walk back the lore change or engage with the boycott demands. Instead, in September 2024, GW actually doubled down to drive the message home, and the second episode of GW's animated series, Titus, featured a new female custodian named Tirith Shiva Kairos.
Your presence is hardly reassuring, but nothing about this situation is favorable.
And they weren't done yet. 3 months later, on Friday, January 16, 2026, GW hosted its New Year's Warhammer preview livestream. And during that stream, they revealed a new range of plastic Custodes for Warhammer the Horus Heresy, a spin-off version of 40k originally released in 2012, that is set 10,000 years before the main 40k timeline. But in this new range, they included the first ever physical female custodian miniatures, and more important than that to fans, a female shield captain miniature.
I really like that golden laurel wreath that has been sort of woven into her hair.
Now during the same livestream, they said that the Horus Heresy kits could also be used in Warhammer 40k games, suggesting that female Custodes existed there too. Also, on January 16th, they published an article called New Custodes, Your Questions Answered, and addressed one popular question about if the Custodes are still the sons of noble houses, to which they replied,
this wasn't the only source of recruitment. Noble daughters could have also been taken. The inexorable war machine of the Imperium still requires a constant churn of new recruits.
And so the Q&A confirmed that yes, there was no difference between male and female custodians. So GW GW seemingly got what they wanted, and it was time for the community to speak back. An article came out on January 20th, 2026 titled "The battle over Warhammer 40k's female custodians is over, and we all won." And the actual hobbyist community reactions on Facebook and Reddit mostly talked about the quality of the models rather than their gender, meaning that most people simply didn't care. The reported response was positive, and many said GW was
putting its foot down against its bad faith right-wing base with the releases.
Now in the end, GW never apologized to Mark or other boycott organizers for the move, and female custodians remained canon in both Warhammer 40k and Warhammer the Horus Heresy. The boycott organized by Mark seemingly had no measurable impact on GW's commercial trajectory.